Europe, the UK, and the US are in a race to develop their 6th generation aircraft. The US is working on its next generation air dominance program. The United Kingdom has invested in its Tempest program, and France, Germany, and Spain are collaborating on the FCAS. The next generation fighter jet from the United States, in particular, has specifications so ambitious that they had to get NASA involved. This fighter is known as the X-44 Manta, and it was an American conceptual aircraft design that had the potential to be even stealthier than the famed F-22 Raptor. Even though this aircraft's design never got off the drawing board, its influence can still be seen in many of today's next-generation planes. So, in this video, we'll be looking at all there is to know about the American 6th generation fighter of the future that has been under development for 20 years. The Lockheed Martin X-44 Manta, which stands for Multi-Axis No-Tail Aircraft, began as an American conceptual aircraft designed in 1999. The X-44 was one of several designs pitched to the US Air Force as a way to augment the branch's stealthily airframes. However, it was the only one of them that was tailless. It has since been studied by NASA and the US Air Force when it was intended to test the feasibility of yaw, pitch, and roll authority without horizontal tailplanes, vertical stabilizers, or rudder surfaces, a stark contrast to every advanced fighter since the beginning of time. This true one-of-a-kind fighter will have horizontal and vertical control surfaces, which usually come with conventional jet sails, replaced with high-tech 360-degree thrust vector control capabilities to provide yaw, pitch, and roll control. The Manta aimed to leverage thrust vector control to give the aircraft supreme acrobatic capabilities that it would truly need in a high-stakes dogfight. Today, more than 2 decades later, the concept appears to be found consistently across nearly all official renderings of the Air Force's next air superiority fighter being developed under the NGAD program. Rather than beginning from scratch, Lockheed Martin's first step towards the development of the X-44 Manta was to decide on a test bed upon which it would be built. And what better option for that responsibility than the greatest air superiority fighter in the history, F-22 Raptor. Like the F-22 on which the X-44 was based, it would have been highly stealthy and may have been stealthier than its F-22 parent. Renderings of the X-44 concept indicate that it would have carried over the F-22's air intake inlets designed to diffuse enemy radar inside them rather than reflect it outwards. But quite unlike its predecessor, the X-44 design was tailless, sans tail. These designs would have a very low radar signature, making them inherently stealthier than other tailed airframes. Thrust vectoring, which the Manta uses in its maneuvering, is when the dual engine's exhaust nozzles direct exhaust in various directions. Though certainly innovative, thrust vectoring designs are nothing new. One successful Russian design in service with the Indian Air Force, a variant of the Sukhoi Su-30, benefits from very high maneuverability thanks to thrust vectoring nozzles. The modified delta wing on the X-44 also had a couple of benefits over its predecessor. By design, these delta wings have more surface area internally and externally than traditional swept wings and can therefore hold more fuel. These delta wings act as an integral fuel tank, thus explaining why they're called wet wings, and can hold a greater volume of fuel than the rest of the plane's wings. This kind of fuel storage is relatively common and allows for a large amount of fuel to be carried. In addition to higher fuel capacity, the X-44 would have benefited from a more aerodynamic airframe and consequently lower drag while in flight. Whether or not the X-44 Manta is the design that will be used for the 6th generation fighters remains unclear, but certain situations still allow for speculations to spread unbound. It all began last year when the US Air Force announced that they had already designed, built, and tested a prototype aircraft as part of their next generation air dominance program. This new jet promises to be more advanced than any fighter to ever come before it. Designed to not only do battle with the advanced 5th generation fighters being churned out by America's opponents in Russia and China, but to dominate them for decades to come. At around the same time, the Air Force also unveiled a birthday celebrating image seemingly showing a wedge-shaped aircraft with no conventional tail section, prompting some to wonder if the artist's handiwork had anything to do with the NGAD announcement that came alongside it. Since then, other official images from the Air Force and renderings from prominent aviation firms like Lockheed Martin have all shown similar wedge-shaped aircraft. Contrary to what you might already think, the speculation did not immediately point to the X-44 Manta as it is now. Instead, many pointed towards Northrop's highly capable, ultimately overlooked YF-23 Black Widow II, a beastly fighter from Northrop Grumman that now sits at a museum thanks to the sheer existence of the F-22 Raptor, which narrowly bettered the YF 23 years ago to be the world's first 5th-generation fighter. Well, the US military have never been one to change plans out of worry about piracy. They just get it done to a quality that can't be imitated. And with their recent announcement that they had already designed, built, and tested a prototype aircraft from the NGAT program, followed by a birthday celebratory image that featured a wedge-shaped aircraft with a conventional tail section, it's safe to say that some aircraft that's been under, but progressively due to the artist renderings and the practical limitations of developing a new fighter in such a short time. People began to think that the X-44 Manta may represent an early iteration of what has or will become at least part of America's next prize fighter in the sky. The X-44's name, Manta, communicates right away the intent behind the concept. After decades of constant trial and error in the development of air weaponry, some features, such as conventional tail sections with vertical and horizontal control surfaces, became the standard for a capable tactical aircraft, while both the F-22 and later the F-35 adopted slightly different tails than you'd find in more conventional, non-stealth 4th-generation fighters like the F-16. The X-44 Manta aimed to pull off the same sort of maneuverability without the need for those tail surfaces. The aircraft's radar return would be dramatically reduced with no tail section, creating an even stealthier fighter than America's most popular stealth-capable F-22. Considering these are the most ambitious goals for a research program that is expected to start flying 6th-generation planes in about 2 years, Lockheed Martin partnered up with NASA to talk about how to bring this concept to fruition. Successfully making an acrobatic fighter that could forego the need to use a tail for handling would mean relying heavily on using thrust vector controls to change the directions of fighters' paths. NASA had already had a great deal of successful experience using thrust vector controls on high-performance fighter in the F-15 Active, which was a modified variant of the F-15 Eagle that used front wing canards and thrust vectoring jet nozzles to produce a fighter that could outperform the legendary Eagle in almost every possible way. Put simply, thrust vector controls provide the craft with the ability to aim or point the nozzle of the jet engine. In some platforms, like the F-22 Raptor, that nozzle aiming is done on a single plane, up or down, while in other jets, like Russia's 4th-generation Su-37, the nozzle can move in 360 degrees, offering even more dramatic options when it comes to rapidly shifting directions. The F-22 Raptor's thrust vectoring can allow the pilot, in the incidence of a head-on engagement, to point the nose and weapons of the fighter down at an enemy jet as it passes by, all the while continuing to push in the same original direction. And in a close-up scrape between two fighters who are trying successfully to turn tighter than the other to get weapons lock, that same thrust vectoring capability in jets like the F-22 or the Su-35 can allow them to change directions far more aggressively than any advanced jet without thrust vectors controls. Unlike the F-22 that leverages thrust vector controls alongside its more conventional tail section, Lockheed Martin proposes to merely use the F-22 design as a starting point for this tailless technology and demonstrate that this new technology is just as capable as fighter designs we have come to see as conventional in recent decades. And funny enough, the X-44 is not the only F-22 based concept rolling around at the Pentagon. But that's a story for another day. The question that is on everyone's mind right now is, will they be able to pull it off? Well, that's for us to find out. Until we meet again in the next video, leave a comment for us and let us know what you think.